Funny, though, that the pedophile wasn't as deserving of your effort.
A very nasty tone in his voice, and Edgar was taken aback.
Or, for that matter, those two teenagers in the movie theater. What makes the difference?
A very uncomfortable thought, and Edgar struggled to find a way to respond.
It's not a matter of who these people are. It's the position that I'm in to help them. Uh-huh. So tell me, when Johnny left to attend to something down in the basements, leaving you with those two teenagers whose names you've probably already forgotten, why didn't you set them free? You were in quite the position to help them there. You were also in the position to tell Johnny to stop torturing them, and yet somehow that thought didn't cross your mind as you sat on the steps and watched. Why is that? Well...
He was too complacent. Scriabin had easily backed him into a corner. He forgot this was what he did best.
It's that... I guess that back then, things were different between me and Nee. I mean, I couldn't really talk to him back then. I was too afraid. So what you're telling me, essentially, is that you were unwilling to help two suffering human beings just because you were afraid. Afraid for your own life. In the light of this, and other such events in the past, it's a bit much for me to accept your avenging crusader role now. You've already let a number of human beings slip through your fingers, people you were entirely capable of helping, without a twinge of conscience. But now, suddenly, Jimmy is worth your attention? Suddenly Jimmy is your responsibility? What makes him different? What makes him any more worthy of your help than the others you ignored? You've let down countless others, hundreds perhaps, by your lack of action. Forgive my skeptical nature, but I hardly believe that your intention to rescue Jimmy is either sincere or out of the goodness of your heart. It won't erase the people that you've forgotten. If you're afraid of getting indirect blood on your hands, I regret to inform you that you're completely drenched in it.
Edgar stared at his hands. Scriabin gave a contented sigh.
God, that felt good.
Edgar buried a hand in his hair and closed his eyes.
Shut up. But seriously, Edgar, why? Jimmy means nothing to you. As a matter of fact, he threatened to kill you. How ironic. Do people have to want to murder you for you to want to save them?
Ouch. Edgar winced, but couldn't think of anything to say in response.
Either way, Jimmy is not worth your attention. He's not your responsibility. You did, in my opinion, more than enough to try and dissuade him from his suicidal visit with Johnny, and he refused to listen. He's a moronic teenager who thinks that his problems are the be-all and end-all of the earth, and assumes that everyone else agrees with him. He idolized Nee merely because he represents what he wants to be, romanticized what he wants Nee to do. All petty high school revenge fantasies of getting back at the teachers and kids that pushed you around, with some high-gloss goth poetry, beauty of death polish to try and make it seem less shallow. He has no concept, no ability to understand the scale of his problems as compared to, say, a sociopath like our dear Nee. All of these are character flaws, though. Hardly enough to warrant killing someone. Although perhaps you disagree. You did let those two from the movie theater suffer immensely, die probably, for merely being obnoxious.
His head was pounding. An insistent throbbing pain was building in what felt like the lower part of his skull.
I'm not a bad person.
He couldn't think of anything else to say. Scriabin ignored him.
Jimmy has killed people. He's a murderer, and from what I heard while you were drifting off at one point, I'm fairly sure he raped someone as well. These are crimes which are on a far grander scale than almost any of the people Nee has encountered and killed. You have to agree with me that Jimmy's crimes easily surpass those of the clerk who turned off the brain-freezing machine at the wrong time, or whatever it was that poor man did. Not only that, Jimmy hasn't even expressed any kind of remorse for what he's done, instead reveling in the fact that he ended someone's life for an unbelievably stupid reason. He seems completely and utterly aware of what he's doing and entirely capable of stopping himself from doing it. And yet, he does, and did, not do so. Jimmy can't even play the insanity card, for all the good it does, as a justification for what he's done like Johnny can. Now let's play some hypothetical games here. Let's say that our fanboy Jimmy gets caught killing someone. He's jailed and sent to court, and let's assume that the evidence has built up, as he was too stupid to hide it properly. Glad to see her being impartial. Too stupid to hide it properly, and he's pronounced guilty. Let's say he's killed a number of people, though it pales in comparison to his idol. And not only that, he's also convicted for the rape of that girl. Now, how would the state deal with this criminal?
I don't know. Edgar didn't want to talk about this. Life sentence, I guess.
Maybe. But, depending on what state you're living in, there's a chance that he could get the death penalty. Now tell me, if you've been following this as I hope you have, what the difference would be from Jimmy meeting his end at the hands of his misguided idol, or in the tight embrace of an electrical chair? What would be the difference? What makes one more just than the other? Are you willing, Edgar, to go against the pronouncement of the law that he should die to support your theory that he deserves to live? Does your responsibility for him end when the law takes him off your hands? And by extension, wouldn't your responsibility end when he falls into Johnny's hands, just as he always intended?
No, it's not right. He shook his head and wished the pain would stop.
Why? It just isn't!
Backed into a corner, and he couldn't find a way to logically justify what he just knew. Having to explain the unexplainable. Why did Scriabin have to be so good at this? If I can prevent this, if I can save him, I'm going to try.
As I said before, why him? Why him out of the hundreds of others who have died, perhaps unjustly, under Johnny's blade? Why is your righteousness so selective? God, shut up! How can you be like this?
Edgar turned towards the action figure. How can you argue like this to let someone die? How can someone's life mean so little to you? A pause. Then Scriabin replied in a smooth, even tone.
I present the same question to you. You can't judge me! Ugh.
He pressed his hands to his head.
These are different situations. Things are different. Just because I'm afraid there's little logical recourse for you in this scenario. You are not responsible for Jimmy. It's his own stupid fault if he gets killed. And what's the loss if he is? He's a murderer, and a rapist, and a remarkably stupid one at that. Although he does serve as an ironic piece to the main focus of so many of our conversations.
Do you think it's okay that I kill people, Edgar?
Nee, it is possible to like a person without liking what they do. What about Nee? By your logic, it wouldn't matter if he died as well, since he's also done bad things.
There was that bitter hatred that he had yet to hear directed at any other target.
Do you think I'd argue with you on that point? Where on earth did you ever get the impression that I liked Johnny at all? I've told you since the beginning that there's no worse relationship you could have than with him. You just never listened, and look where it's gotten you.
No. Thinking back, sifting through his memories, and Edgar found things once said that encouraged him to deepen the relationship that Scriabin now claimed to despise. It hadn't been his idea to hug him for one thing, among others, and...
That didn't turn out quite the way we expected, did it?
Contradiction. The thought cast a sudden and intense light on what Scriabin was saying, and Edgar spoke slowly. He had to make sure that his suspicion was well-founded before...
You want him dead? I want him out of your life. He's a distraction now, an unhealthy and unproductive one. Surely you concede there is a great deal more at stake than whether or not Nee loves you, and whether or not you love him in return. Your soul and your sanity are in jeopardy if they're not already lost.
Just as he thought.
You know...
Edgar narrowed his eyes. I would like to take what you're telling me at face value, but you've reminded me that that's not a good idea. There's more to this than what you're saying. And there's more to your argument than the logical front you're putting on. I remember, Scriabin, what you said to Jimmy when he threatened me. I remember how you felt. I remember how possessive you felt. I know there's more to you wanting Jimmy dead than just him being a bad person.
It'd be much simpler that way, wouldn't it?
His voice more hostile.
If this was all tied up with emotional baggage that would invalidate the truth, make it less believable. I'm afraid I can't indulge you here, Edgar. Here's one fantasy that I will not cooperate with you on.
No. Edgar looked at the wall for a moment, thinking over his words carefully. There was a good chance that he could only say this once, because if Scriabin reacted the way he thought he would...
There's always something more with you. There's always some kind of ulterior motive, some deeper motivation for what you say to me. From the very beginning you lied to me, said you were a part of me, and used my doubt and my fear to develop. You say that I had a hand in your development, and yes, I'm sure that's true, but you're not entirely innocent yourself. There's always something more to you, Scriabin. There's always more to your words than you'd like me to think about. So often I tend to focus on what you say. Too often have I thought about how it would affect me, and I never considered that my reaction may have been part of your motivation. What does this have to do with anything?
Scriabin's voice was rough.
You pointed out to me before that I was justifying something to myself by going on and on with all those words. Say what you want to say.
Edgar winced at the reference to Jimmy, then narrowed his eyes further. He could feel the muscles near his mouth twitch for a moment.
Here goes. This isn't about my morality, about any kind of ethics. This isn't about Jimmy at all. You don't want me to become independent, become strong like you said back then. I didn't even realize it at the time. It didn't even occur to me since I was hurting from the lie you had told me. God, using that moment against me. You'll do anything to get what you want. You don't want me to make my own decisions about my life. You want me to make yours. First you said that I'd have to depend on myself. And then right after that, it was all about you. I had to depend on you. My weapon, my support, my everything. It all came back to you. Edgar!
An angry cry, and Edgar suspected that it was to buy him some time to think while simultaneously stopping the conversation.
Do you remember what I said earlier? Do you remember what I said about how I experience your emotions? How at times I have a clearer view of what's going on inside you than you yourself do? You always say that. Well then understand this.
Scriabin hissed.
What you wanted more than anything back then was someone to rely on, someone to take your god's place. I felt it. I felt your pain, and I took on that role for you back then because that's what you wanted me to do. Whenever things get too hard, you always fall back on relying on me. What I was trying to get across was that you should try to prevent that. No!
He was looking hard enough, looking through, and it all shattered underneath his scrutiny, underneath his skepticism that he now realized he had been neglecting. Lie after lie falling apart, tied together by those threads that Scriabin had mentioned. A badly knit sweater, and Edgar reached out and grabbed the action figure with one hand.
You didn't say that! God, you're lying to me! You're lying right to my face! How can you? How could you lie to me like that back then? Back when I was hurting so badly. How could you lie to me about something so important? This isn't about me becoming powerful. It's about you. And what about me? This is about you. This is about what you want me to do. This isn't about what I want. This isn't about what I need, what I should become. This is about what you want. Everything you ever told me. It was all for you. To make me what you want me to be. It was all an effort. God, a huge, elaborate lie to get me to believe that for once you cared about something other than yourself. That you ever had anything other than your own benefit in mind. Just using me. I'm not your tool, Scriabin. I'm not your toy. You don't own me. Yes, that honor belongs to Johnny, doesn't it?
Edgar stared at the action figure, and his mouth fell open.
Don't think that because I haven't been as cruel as before, that I can't be so now.
Scriabin's voice was filled with hate.
Don't think me harmless. Exposing a lie doesn't render me powerless, if that was a lie to begin with.
His grip tightened until his fingers ached and trembled.
You know it was. Just stop pretending. What do you hope to accomplish with this?
His tone was flippant and condescending, not taking him seriously and intentionally, deliberately making that clear. Edgar felt his heart quicken as his anger built higher.
Again, are you looking for an insight into my psyche? Do you know what I want? Another reprisal of that all too often asked question, masked in anger and righteous indignation. I have doubts now, Edgar, that you really want to know the truth about me, about what I want. It's something you wouldn't want to hear, and therefore you just block it out. Pretend it never happened.
Edgar wasn't going to let this go. Not this time.
Don't change the subject. You were lying to me. You were. You always have been. This isn't about me. This isn't about my sense of ethics.
He was surprised at the mocking tone he took with his last 3 words.
You couldn't care less, could you? All that talk about my conscience, about hating what I do to myself, how I need to stop torturing myself. It was all a lie, wasn't it? All of it. All of the sympathy and kindness you've given me. It was all just manipulating me. Just getting me to do and believe what you want. To rely on you rather than God.
Scriabin's tone was dismissive.
Black and white, Edgar. Just because I lied about one thing doesn't mean I lied about them all.
Edgar glared for a few seconds, then threw the toy as hard as he could. It hit the wall with a loud thump and fell to the floor.
How could I have ever trusted you?
Edgar was furious, and this time found no regret or fear at the feeling. It was anger at a source deserved. It was anger that could safely be expressed without ramifications because he wasn't human. Scriabin wasn't real. He kept forgetting that, and it was time for that to stop.
How could I have ever thought you'd think of anyone besides yourself? That you'd ever have anyone's welfare in mind except your own? I'm just a glorified vessel for you, a toy to be manipulated, an elaborate marionette. Well, not anymore. This is my body. I was here first.
Edgar stood and walked over to where the action figure rested on the floor. It looked small against the carpet, broken.
I was here first. You came after me, and you fed yourself from me, and I allowed it. Allowed it! In the end, this body is mine, and it will always be mine. I make my own decisions. I define my own life. I define myself. It's not your place to make decisions for me, to try and change my life to suit your needs. You're a parasite, a delusion, perhaps some indication of future psychosis, but you are not a person. You are not a real person. You don't have rights. You don't have any claim to my body just because you chewed out a place in my brain to stay. You have no claim to me. I don't belong to anyone except myself. Not you and not Johnny. I don't belong to you.
Nothing. Edgar knelt and looked at the toy. One of the arms was out of joint, and the head was tilted at a strange angle. He reached out and began to adjust, to fix what had been knocked askew.
You're mine. You're my voice. When I felt you get angry, when I felt your anger at Jimmy, I felt touched at first. Now I realize, you just don't understand.
There, he found it. The perfect condescending cadence that mocked and mimicked Scriabin's tone from earlier. The dismissive tone that spoke of an unsurpassable inequality of status. The overwhelming assertion through each syllable, each deliberate pause and emphasized word, that he was better than the person he was talking to, now and forever. Wouldn't Scriabin be proud of him?
You really think you're human? You really think that you're my equal? That somehow we're really two people, rather than one in one mental monologue that's gone on for too long? You've berated me for so long for laboring under my illusions, and yet you've held one for yourself, pretending to be human, to be real. That my body is your body. Well, it isn't. It wasn't, and it never will be. My body is mine. My mind is mine, and they will never be yours. You will never be more than what you are. I don't know where you got the impression that you could ever do so. Your desperation for reality, for my validation, is pathetic.
Trying hard to dig at the one weakness he knew Scriabin had, and his voice was shaking along with his hands. He wanted it to stop, but the more he tried to cease the trembling, the worse it got. Something like adrenaline must be causing this, he was sure. His rage felt familiar and addictively powerful, and he never wanted it to end. The action figure now clutched tightly in one fist, and his knuckles were white.
I know you can hear me.
Edgar felt his lip curling in a snarl.
I know you can hear what I'm saying. You've become too self-important, too self-absorbed for your own damn good. You never thought I'd catch on to your manipulation. All those lies you weave around me. Pretending at my freedom and just trapping me yourself. God, you've always been my enemy. How could I have been so blind?
Nothing.
Talk to me!
Edgar shook the action figure, as if that would renew the conversation.
I know you can hear me. Don't pull away from me. Oh no, don't pass out halfway through this, our little session together.
He found the words rasping through clenched teeth, choked with bitterness and long-repressed rage.
After everything you've done to me, Christ, Scriabin, you even lied about loving me. That's how desperate you are to control me. You always condemn me for so many faults, and you have the exact same ones. We're so alike, and yet that's the last thing you could want. Except when it serves your purpose, when it prevents me from attacking you. Answer me! Answer me, goddammit!
Stubborn silence.
God. And to think I could ever depend on you.
Still shaking, and this was definitely adrenaline now. He could feel it. His entire body shuddering in waves, clenched tight in his stomach and spreading tremors through his limbs, causing the toy to shake in his hand as he struggled to keep still.
To think that I was ever that stupid. That hurt. To depend on you. Depend on what? A voice in my head? A desperate delusion? I can't depend on you. I could never depend on you. You have as many faults as I do, except you aren't even open about them. You're deeper in denial than I could ever hope to be. How could I depend on someone like you? How could I ever depend on such a shameless hypocrite? On such a compulsive liar?
He stood, walked back over to his bed, and set the action figure back on his desk. Edgar wanted to slam it down, throw it again, but something made him put the toy down the same way and in the same place he always had. All the anger he had sublimated into other things, had kept hidden away for fear of hurting someone or himself or making some kind of grievous error. All of it now coursed through him, and it felt so natural. It all felt so right. And he hadn't felt this confident in what he was doing for so long. He felt capable, strong and able to defend himself, to reinvent himself, to take back what he had let slip out of his hands without thought, and over it all that anger that made it seem so real, so permanent, so plausible.
No, I won't depend on you, Scriabin. I won't listen to you. I am never listening to you again. This is it. I'm taking responsibility for my life. I'm taking my life back. My decisions are my own now, and if you don't like them, then that's too bad. You have no power over me. The only power you have is the power I gave you, and I can take it away. I'm afraid that's a side effect to being an unwelcome parasite.
Still silent, and that only fed his rage. He didn't just want to be angry. That wasn't enough. He wanted to hurt someone.
What's wrong? The last thing you could ever do was stop talking. What's wrong now? Can't find anything to say? Any logical traps to hide what you really want? Any smart-ass remarks, twisted metaphors, or biblical mockery? What's wrong? Since when have you ever been at a loss for words?
Silence, and he felt his hands clench, his entire body shake for a moment, and he could see himself pulling the toy apart, ripping out arms and legs and throwing it in the garbage disposal in the kitchen. He stood there, envisioned himself doing it. Could hear the plastic squeaking as he tore limbs from their sockets, the pop of the head coming off. Destroy him. Destroy this. Destroy everything once and for all. And for a few seconds, he thought of it as murder. Then he bitterly corrected himself. It wasn't murder if the other person didn't even exist. He could see himself destroying the emblem of what he hated so clearly, so easily. But he did not move. He stood and tried to force the motion, yelled at his limbs to obey, but instead he only stood and stared. Edgar turned away and felt a twinge of nausea again, the room spinning just slightly. This felt familiar, but he was not letting that distract him.
"You make me sick,"
he said in a low voice, then turned to his closet.
"You make me sick. I'm going out, and guess what? You're coming along. You know why? Because you can't stop me. You can't stop me from doing what I want anymore. I'd say that we were going out, but we're not. I am, and you're coming along whether you want to or not. Isn't that right?"
He took off his glasses, considered setting them to one side carefully, then found that he didn't care. He tossed them onto the carpet without much concern, then pulled off his shirt with motions so quick that his ears stung afterwards. He searched through his drawers for a clean shirt, finding that the insistent silence, the complete mental silence, only made him want vengeance more strongly, want to hurt him more, to hurt him as Edgar had been hurt before. How could he have ever thought that Scriabin could ever feel sympathy? Apologize? Even feel at all? He pulled a shirt on and picked up his glasses. They were undamaged. Edgar had specifically asked for stronger frames, and he stared again at the toy standing by his bed.
"Why won't you answer me?"
Edgar stalked back over to his dresser and found his voice rising. He didn't want it to, but before he knew it, he was shouting.
"I know you can hear me. I know you can hear me because you hear everything, don't you? You can hear and feel everything, so I know you can hear me. Answer me! Say something!"
He felt dizzy, but he wasn't going to sit down. Still refused to speak, but finally Edgar could hear something in the back of his mind. Breathing.
"I know you're there."
He felt something rushing to his head, and he wasn't sure where the floor was anymore. His vision slowly fading out, a faint kind of blackness around the edges, and he felt dizzy, but he wasn't going to stop.
"I can hear you. This is you, isn't it? You can't handle me standing up to you, so you're hurting me physically again. Like you did before, when I had that seizure thing. You can't argue with me normally, so you're just going to try and get me to pass out. It won't work this time. I won't let you do this to me. I won't let you have any power over me anymore. This is my life. This is my life. It's not yours. It will never be yours. You will never have a life of your own."
The floor shifting, and the blackness flooding his vision, and his head was pounding. All of it intensified, amplified by the amount of adrenaline currently coursing through his body, by the sheer, undiluted rage he felt. Directed at Scriabin primarily. But even now it shifted to his own body, to whatever was happening, to the fact the one time he was standing up for himself, that something like this had to happen. A soft sound in his mind that he couldn't easily define, and the blackness began to fade away. The floor slowly began to stay in one place, stop shifting back and forth, and he found his sense of balance again.
You should probably sit down.
Scriabin's voice was soft and emotionless.
So there you are.
Edgar glared at the toy and decided to stay where he was. He didn't have to listen to him.
Why so silent all of a sudden? What's wrong? Can't think of anything? Sit down. Something's gone wrong. Something's got a hold of you. There's something that's trying to... Just sit down. It must have come in before, when... It doesn't know what it's doing, what effect it's having on you. God, you never stop, do you?
Edgar said bitterly, and crossed his arms. The floor again began to list to one side, but Edgar refused to move with it.
You can never stop lying. What are you blaming now? Sit down. Not until you tell me why. I already did.
Scriabin's voice seemed strangely devoid of emotion, of the hurt that Edgar expected. He felt disappointed.
This thing is doing something to you. It's making you dizzy. If you sit down, I can... God, looking back on it, there were so many things that I thought were something more, or something real. So many things that you could have done, could have used to try and gain my trust. When I was drifting before, that was you, wasn't it? You set up the situation, hurt me, then pretend to help me. Set up these traps and rescue me and think that I'll fall for it. That will give you the edge over me, give you more of the control you so desperately want. You were lying to me then. You're lying to me now. Of course you can fix this. You're the one who's doing it to me. Sit down. No!
Edgar moved, and that turned out to be a mistake. The floor abruptly turned and twisted beneath him, raised itself up, and before he knew it, he was on his back and he couldn't feel his legs.
Okay. I can figure this out. Stop it!
Edgar wanted to speak out loud, but found his voice internal.
Stop this! I know what you're doing now. I know what this means. I won't fall for it again. Stop lying to me for once in your life. I can fix this.
Scriabin's voice shook.
I can fix this. I know I can. Stop it!
He wanted to feel his body again. He wanted to feel, but his body wasn't moving. Nothing was responding. He could feel the beginning of panic, the desperate desire to escape, to get away. Something pressing on his chest, and it was getting harder to breathe.
Why are you doing this to me?
That was it. That was the question that he had longed to ask since he first heard Scriabin's voice, and he shut his eyes tight. A strangled noise in the back of his mind, and in response, a twinge of compassion. He didn't expect it, didn't think of it, didn't want it, but there it was, and with it came an instinctual question.
Are you okay?
After all this work, this rage that built so high and felt like it took over his whole body, all of it, after all of it, he still felt it. He still felt concerned. He had struggled not only to show Scriabin that he knew the truth, but to make himself stop believing in the lie. Stop believing that Scriabin was anything more than what he had said. Struggled to finally cut this off, to remove the shades of grey that were false to begin with. And yet, he still felt it, and he still asked, and even with the regret that followed, it did not vanish. Connection. If Edgar felt that concern, then...
Oh my god. Oh shit!
Recognizable terror, and the small frightened words.
Oh shit. What's going on?
Successfully distracted from his ranting, and his concern continued unchecked. What on earth was Scriabin this afraid of? Even when Edgar had rewritten his memories, he hadn't sounded this frightened.
What? Get!
Scriabin's words were choking and broken. A pained gasp, something like desperation, and he could hear him hiss. Another stuttering cry, and then a scream tore its way through the back of his mind, startling him out of any angry thoughts that he had been entertaining.
Get away from him! Scriabin, get out!
Scriabin paused, took a few harsh breaths.
Get out! Get out! Who?
Something anguished and short, and again that twinge of compassion.
What? I won't let this. I won't let you. Get out! Get out! Get out! He's mine!
A hoarse scream that he knew would have been painful if forced through physical vocal cords.
I won't let you touch him. I'll kill you. I'll fucking kill you first. Get out! What's going on?
Helpless, trapped in a weak body. And where was his flash of black now? Edgar's arm moved.
Who are you talking to?
A low growl in response to his question. The room abruptly turned beneath him, and he tried desperately to steady himself, to find a sense of balance, some kind of center that wouldn't change. A very long scream of pain in his mind, and he felt something tear. The world stopped spinning. The rushing sound in his head stopped, and when he opened his eyes, he could see. Edgar sat up after a few seconds, shook his head, found no lasting effects from the motion, then looked at the toy on his desk as if it'd give him answers, still standing in the same position as ever.
Scriabin?
Watched, but he didn't move. His concern far more intense, his words quick and high. He didn't even think to prevent it.
Scriabin, are you okay?
Edgar breathed a sigh of relief at that soft moan.
What happened?
He felt drained, nervous somehow. His entire body still shaking, but he wasn't exactly sure why. The after effects of adrenaline, he could guess. All anger vanished in the face of this unknown danger, and now he wasn't sure what to do.
Are you okay? What's going on? Who were you talking to?
A shaky sigh.
What happened? Edgar. Listen. What? Some of the things you said.
He sounded exhausted.
Some of the things you said before. I can't say they're false. But I want you to keep in mind that I'm not the only one who wants to manipulate you. I'm not the only one who now has access to you. The danger that you face is not all from me. The system. That. What was that? What happened? Let's just say, if you'll believe me, of course.
Trying to touch his words with familiar scorn, but his voice shook too much.
That there's a pipeline, an avenue opened through you for hate to come through. And let's say that there are things that find you a potential home.
Edgar's mouth went dry.
What? What do you mean something tried to? I'm afraid that I disagreed with them on that point.
Another shaky sigh.
This is... You can say all you like. Disagree all you like. Lie as much as you want about it. About what I've become and what I've taken from you. But in the end, this is mine. This is my home. I'm not about to let some two-bit figment try to take what's mine. What I've worked so hard for. I don't think so. No.
An attempt at bravado, but it was painfully transparent now.
Is that what this is? I don't think that's all. I can feel it again. You want to protect me, don't you?
Scriben tried to laugh, but began wheezing halfway through.
Protect you? You fool. How easy it is for you to forget everything. Forget anything that doesn't agree with your current argument. Whatever you currently believe. You're such a fool. Do you think, my dear boy, my precious Edgar, that I am the worst thing that could happen to you? Do you think that of all the parasites, as you call them, that could be inhabiting your mind right now, that I am truly the worst there is? That I am really the worst thing in the world for you?
Edgar shivered once, and then couldn't stop. Oh God.
My dear, foolish boy, you don't understand. You don't understand what I am, what I mean, what I could be, what happened. Why don't you just forget about it? It's not important to you.
Edgar ignored the attempt to derail the conversation, tried to find something to focus on.
You sound like you're in pain. Since when have you ever been perceptive?
It sounded like it was difficult for him to speak.
Since when have you ever cared for your unwilling passenger? Your inhuman parasite. Huh. Protect you indeed. I assure you that nothing is taking my place, not while I'm still alive. Nothing is going to set up shop here, not here. I said that I'd fight this system, and I will. This is my territory, and I'll fight for it. You should study that sometime, Edgar. Fighting. I know you're not familiar with it.
His voice trailed off. It didn't even occur to him to contest Scriben's constant references to ownership.
What did you do? How could you have... Wouldn't I have seen it? Or been aware of it? Too wrapped up in your shouting, I suppose.
His voice was getting weaker.
You don't have a talent for paying attention to multiple things at once. What does it matter to you anyway? I don't matter to you, as you so eloquently stated. Rage. Didn't you think, while you yelled about how unusual it was, that you felt so angry? How alien. How foreign. God. And I thought we had a chance. If you're this unaware of the system's effects, If you succumb so easily to some small thing's temptation, then what hope is there really for us? Or rather, for you? You're not giving up. Very true.
His breath caught for a second, and for a moment he heard a soft whine of pain.
I'm not going to give up. I don't think. When whoever runs this system finds out what I've done, I don't think they'll be pleased.
Edgar took a deep breath and stared at his hands. They kept shaking, and he could see the indentations from his nails pressing into his palms. His thoughts were scattering, and he had to keep thinking. He had to keep talking and keep everything in line.
Then, you're not a part of the lock system, are you? Of course.
A soft sigh and real effort.
Of course I'm not. I thought that much would at least be obvious, even to you.
His physical voice sounded even weaker than the mental.
So, you must be something different. Where are you going with this?
Scriabin only sounded vaguely interested.
Encroaching on your territory. Do you think that the system will try to use you? Use you against me? God, I don't know.
Scriabin let out a deep sigh.
You understand. If I'm a little tired, it may not seem as such to you, but I've just been through...
Edgar pressed a shaking hand to his chin in hopes that it would make the tremors stop. Scriabin couldn't have been part of the lock system, even if he had been lying. There was enough evidence to prove him correct. After all, Scriabin had come into being far before the lock system had come into place. He had to be a part of something else.
Funny.
Scriabin gave a wet cough.
You were so worked up earlier, hating so vengefully, so completely, eloquently, I might add. You sounded a great deal like me. But again, once the emotion passes, it falls to the background. We regain equilibrium, back to how things always were. I can't feel your hatred for me now, not like before. Come and gone. Did it ever mean anything at all? Was any of it real? I don't feel angry anymore.
Edgar shook his head.
That's a good thing, if this whole system is going to be kicking in more often. I'm going to have to be more careful with that. I can't let myself get lost like that. I'm not angry, but just because I was angry doesn't mean I was wrong.
Scriabin made a short sound that perhaps would have become a word, but then he lapsed into silence. He breathed another deep sigh, this one with a faint rasp to it.
So many layers. There's more than one motivation for the action that one takes sometimes. It's kind of difficult. Forgive me for doubting you on this point. Again, imitating me.
He didn't like that.
But you understand that if one of your motivations is inherently selfish, perhaps damaging to me.
Edgar sighed and felt something like apathy sweep over him, a lack of emotion, or any kind of involvement, but he had to finish what he was saying.
How can I believe that? How can I believe anything you say when I know that somewhere it might not be true? That it might be for your own benefit, or just to hurt me. How can I risk that? Fool me once. Again, one motivation is not all there is at times. I don't feel comfortable. Some things that I have done are not related to that exactly. But as the relative trust we built is shattered, you understand my reluctance to talk about this. I doubt you'll believe anything I say. It's no fun to lie to someone who won't believe you. You don't lie for fun. True enough.
A kind of rasping sound.
Still, you won't believe me, whether or not I'm telling the truth. So, I feel inclined to just not talk at all. Not to mention that I'm still... I'm not really...
He sighed.
I'm tired, Edgar.
Well, you seem set on the fact that I not judge you for one of the reasons you've been doing this to me.
What other ones are there? What other justification for your behavior is there? Why? What other reason for all of that ego-saving talk in the church? You didn't believe that, did you? You've never believed in that. In my strength. Just presenting me with the illusion got me further under your power. Edgar, this may come as a shock to you. You always preface things that way. But manipulating you was not my original intent. It's not what I was created for. Well, you were the one who brought up change. Does it even matter?
Another hoarse cough.
Does it even matter what I say now? Does it matter what I would ask you? Does it matter? You're changing the subject.
A pause. This time, Scriabin succeeded in changing his tone, his words familiarly touched with hateful sarcasm.
I'm sorry. I must have forgotten my place.
Edgar paused, considered apologizing, then turned to look at the ceiling.
But what other motivation could you have, other than self-preservation? That relates right back to the manipulation, though. That all of this is for your benefit, not mine. Tell me, if you want to convince me to trust you again, was any of the affection, the kindness or concern you ever expressed for me, was any of it real?
A cough.
Scriabin, was any of it real? When I asked you to. And you said that maybe later we could discuss this. Well, I want to discuss it now. What do you feel for me? May I ask you something first? Avoiding the question again.
He didn't say anything, and Edgar sighed.
Fine. Go ahead. I present the question back to you.
A coughing fit this time, and Edgar turned to look at the toy. Still motionless.
What do you care for me? Do you feel anything for me at all, my boy? I find that while your anger may have been foreign, may have been misplaced, you've still believed what you were saying. And to be honest, how much of it was true? I don't know.
Edgar shook his head.
I don't know how It's always changing. I can't... You're not... God, every time I talk with you, it's like I mean, what was our conversation just like? 1 minute you're perfectly civil, and another you're sarcastic like always, and another you're hating, and another you're hated. And then you're hurting or you're compassionate, and you talk about helping me and us, and at the same time, you talk about control and belonging and ownership and God.
He pressed a hand against one of his eyes.
This sounds so stupid. Why can't it be simple? Why can't I just sum it up in one word? You have before.
Scriabin's voice was weak and scratchy.
Shall we say it together?
Edgar stayed silent, but Scriabin said it anyway.
Hate. It can't be that simple. You know that. It isn't that simple, and sometimes I wish it was.
He shook his head again.
I can't hate you. I can't hate. I don't know if I've ever hated anyone. I mean, you've done things for me. You've helped me. You did. You protected me. And even if that was all a lie, an elaborate charade for me, you offered to protect me before, and I know for a fact that that was sincere. I know that wasn't a lie, and that makes things so complicated. I can't say I like you, hardly, if at all, actually. But I can't say anything. I can't say anything definite. It's always changing. God, this sounds so stupid. This sounds like, well, I think you'll find that my feelings towards you can, likewise, not be so easily summarized.
Scriabin gave a soft, pained moan, shaky and uneven as he tried to stop the sound.
Please. I can't. I'm tired. I'm just tired. Tired.
Edgar rolled over and looked at the toy again. The two were sharing perhaps their most honest moment in both their respective lifetimes, and Edgar took the chance to say what he knew was true.
You're not tired. You're hurt. Somehow. I still don't understand. I don't understand what reality must be like for you. There's a world that you keep talking about that I can't see. I can't even hear. It's just constantly just out of my sight. I don't understand. Have you created your own world, your own reality within my mind? It can't be like that. That's not how the human mind works. How much of what you tell me is true?
Another pained noise.
As much as you want to be true. I'm going to... tired. What can I do to help? What? You. I swear from the way that you sound. It sounds like whatever it was you fought off, I guess it would go. But it sounds like it tore you to pieces. Like you're in some serious pain. How? Why? What can I do? It's never any intermediate with you. It's always black or white. Help me, hate me. Never in between. No wonder you're so confused. Stop avoiding the question.
A soft laugh.
It's not so easy. You believed in what you said, and that creates a barrier that cannot be easily overcome. You don't consider me a person. You don't consider me real. You can't even think of the world that I inhabit. You can't empathize enough to try and think of how I would feel, about what my life may be like. All of this, these dehumanizing things you've done to me for so long, all of it creates this distance between us. You cannot simply wish me into being, make me appear in front of you so you can kiss it better and pretend it wasn't your fault that this happened to me in the first place. My fault? My fault? You're the one who decided to tangle with whatever it was, and you're the one who enabled that thing coming in here in the first place.
Silence.
Surely you know that. You understand that this whole lock business, it's your fault. You can't blame anyone else for the situation we're in. You and your obsession with me, with the psychopath, and never thought that'd have consequences.
God, he wanted to dispute that, but Scriabin's current state forced him to curb his tongue. Fighting with him wouldn't help now. He had to find a more effective way to derail the potential argument.
There's nothing that can be done about that now. The only thing we can do is...
Edgar stopped, and he remembered.
Assess the damage.
Flickering memories, the inside of his car and the trench coat.
Scriabin, what happened back in the car?
Scriabin groaned.
I almost forgot. Do you, considering what just occurred?
Struggling not to sound quite so worn out.
I think that blackout may be related to the lock system somehow. But why would I black out like that? What benefit would that have? What benefit would collapse have?
Scriabin snapped.
The system is far from perfect. God, what could have happened? Something must have taken control of me, of my body, to get me to come from here to the church. Something possessed me. I suppose you could think of it that way.
Another soft groan.
Another possibility is that someone took you there. No one was there when I woke up. True, they could have left before you woke up, though. And why would they take me there? It doesn't make sense. Something took control of me. Something took me over. I'm sure of it. God, that sounds so horrible. I can't be losing control of myself this badly. Things can't be this bad for me. Hardly speaks of some other conclusion. Are you sure you don't remember anything? No, I don't remember anything.
A pause, and his tone softened.
I wish I did remember. I'm no more happy with this missing time business than you. After all, it's our body. Our body.
Scriabin groaned again, but didn't say anything in response.
Have we gotten anywhere?
Edgar sighed.
Have we accomplished anything with this? With talking about this? Except going back to the status quo? Well, are you going to try and help Jimmy? I still don't see why you should.
Scriabin managed to sound resentful. Edgar stared at the toy for a few seconds.
You don't have to. I'm going to try anyway.
Perhaps if he was in another state of mind, Scriabin would have been annoyed at Edgar's attempt to stop the conversation, to exert any kind of authority. Instead, he hummed a snatch of a song, and Edgar recognized it as the tune from earlier that day. A few minutes before Scriabin spoke again.
Fine. What did you have in mind?
Edgar shook his head.
I'm not sure yet. I can't call Johnny. Not after last time. Even if he's disconnected that. I can't risk something like that. You can't find his house either, so that's not an option. Unless you focus on Todd's house instead. I could try and track Jimmy. All you have is his first name.
Edgar was surprised that Scriabin was contributing, then thought a little harder. So far, all he had presented were the negatives, the case against. It was too early to say that Scriabin was trying to help him.
If I wait for Johnny to contact me, he might not try in time. Jimmy might have already found him by that point. If he hasn't found him by now, that is. What time is it?
Edgar glanced over at his alarm clock.
He won't be asleep, so I could go over there. But I don't know if I want to bother him right now. He can be so moody, can't he? Tomorrow, then?
Another failed attempt at sarcasm.
Tomorrow. Something. I'm going to do something this time.
Edgar fell back against his mattress and stared at the ceiling.
I'm going to save someone this time.
He could feel the desire, soft in the back of his mind, to contest the statement, to rip holes in it until it had no meaning, and then it faded. Small vibrations. Minor things that he had only just become aware of, and he was still not sure how to listen. How to listen. He had always thought himself a good listener. Sighs gone unrecorded, and perhaps Edgar had been purposely deaf this entire time, but he thought that gave Scriabin too much credit, too much of what he wanted. He hadn't really heard it, thought of it until now. That much was true, but he wouldn't let that continue. Not quite sure of what he was doing, but he tried to focus on that desire that had flashed across his own emotion so briefly. Familiar, but distorted, twisted just slightly into that uniqueness that Scriabin had acquired at some time that Edgar could not easily remember. Listened, focused, trailed, found. He felt a sense of exhaustion and apathy that matched what had come over him previously, deep and resigned. The desire to just stop fighting for once, to stop this, to let it go for once, to rest. Beneath it all, he could feel shaking strands, thin strings electric of pain crackling near and sharp. Scriabin was in pain. Real pain. Edgar knew it. He could easily see through his claims of exhaustion. To feel it was a different experience entirely. His body did not respond to it, did not try to numb or ache the feeling. His mind accepted its reality, its existence, but it was uniquely not his. Still, he felt intimately aware of it, knowledgeable of how much it would hurt, distract, tear and torment, and what it was doing to Scriabin. What effect it had on the other person, such close knowledge and yet that distance that differentiated the two. It was so close that Edgar feared that if he really tried, or maybe if he didn't, that pain could easily become his. That if he reached out and touched it in some way, somehow, that it would easily jump from one person to another. God, was this what it felt like for Scriabin? To be so closely aware, to be able to feel things so tangibly and yet from such a distance, such an unsafe boundary. Soft breathing, laboured and laced with the occasional sound, accidental from vocal cords and not meant to be vibrating, unwilling indications of the process of dealing with pain. Something that Edgar assumed must have been his own heartbeat, and he felt something ooze and flow, and wherever Scriabin was, and whatever strange realm or reality he seemed to reside in, Edgar knew that he was curled into himself, and he was bleeding. Trying to hide from him, hide perceived weakness, and Edgar knew pride wasn't his own particular moral failing. Another frustrated whimpering sound, and then a soft sense of curiosity. Awareness of a spectator. He could sense some kind of anger beneath it, resentment, something that might have approached hatred, but mostly confusion. Edgar opened his eyes, looked at the clock, and found that 2 hours had gone by. Edgar stared at the ceiling.
I probably shouldn't do that again.
A moment of silence from Scriabin before he spoke, his voice shaky and soft.
Do whatever you want. I don't care. Not unless I'm prepared, I mean.
Not now. He didn't want to hurt Scriabin further. A quick recovery, clarification, and he hoped that Scriabin wouldn't hold it against him. Someone knocked at his door. Edgar should have felt more surprised, but instead there was just a vague sense of curiosity. He found himself already out of his room and walking towards the front door without the exact memory of doing so. He should have felt something more than what he was, or wasn't, feeling. Anticipation, fear, something like that. There was only one person who would be at his door. Where was his fear? He opened it. There sat a box of once frozen waffles. Waffles. Edgar stared at this without comprehending, or perhaps with some comprehension and just overwhelmed with the question of why for a few minutes. Then he noticed a small note that rested on top of the brightly coloured box. It took a few mental commands before his body moved, but he eventually leaned over and picked up the scrap of paper. It was torn from something. Edgar wasn't sure what, and the writing on it was familiar. Super dark letters, a few random scratches here and there.
Edgar, I'm sorry for... Have some waffles.
Edgar wasn't sure what it was that Johnny felt sorry for, but it was one of those rare moments that he apologized at all, and, whether or not it was for anything Edgar could have prevented, he felt somewhat touched.
Waffles?
Scriabin perhaps meant to sound contemptuous, but instead sounded childlike and weak.
He got you waffles.
I guess so, Edgar said. He walked back into his apartment, shut the door, and walked to the kitchen. Without any thought, much as his trip to the door, he put the box in the freezer. He stared at the scrap of paper, then watched his hands carefully pin the note to the fridge with the magnet that his phone company had sent him as a thank you for his patronage. Edgar stared at the note and wanted to comprehend it, but nothing worked through. He knew this was deeper than it appeared, but he couldn't access it.
Don't you have something to say about this?
desperate for some kind of meaningful input on the note and gift. A pause, and then Scriabin made a soft "nuh-uh" sound.
Are you sure?
The same sound, and a shaky sigh.
Maybe I've been too close to you.
Edgar reached out and touched the edge of the note softly.
I'm sorry for... What does it mean? What does any of this mean?
Edgar expected Scriabin to have an answer, whether or not it was one he liked. Instead, Scriabin just made a general, "I don't know" kind of noise, and again a flicker of emotion crossing his own, that gap where he knew he should be feeling something about this. Not his emotion there, and not intruding so boldly where Edgar's emotion should be, but it was just a tinge of Scriabin's confusion, exhaustion, and the soft crackling of pain beneath it all.
Maybe he thought I'm not hungry. It's not a physical gift. Or maybe it is. I'm indifferent to waffles. I don't think I've ever mentioned them to him.
Edgar walked back to his room, still confused.
He's not giving up.
That sounded good.
Too close. He's not giving up. He's not giving up on me just yet.
He rested his head against his pillow and let his eyes close. He found another tinge of emotion, too soft and fast to be identified, and he tried to focus.
I won't give up either.
He dreamed that night, dreamed of his room. He dreamed of his room, and of a man curled up against the dresser beside his bed, bleeding and alone. His trench coat was laid out carefully to one side, several holes ripped in the tough fabric that aligned with matching tears in the body of its owner. His striped shirt hung in tatters in places, giving glimpses of angry red gashes against skin, smeared blood and something black along the edges. He sat with his scraped knees drawn loosely to his upper body, though not close enough to aggravate the gaping hole through his shoulder and the slashes across his chest. Deep cuts across his arms, shallow scratches across his face, bright red and burning, and his jeans were ripped and stained. He stared at bloody hands and shook uncontrollably. Edgar dreamed that night of walking to the shivering man and sitting beside him. He watched him flinch away, raise his hands to hide his destroyed shoulder, to hide the ripped muscle and flashes of bone through rent flesh. He said something that he couldn't remember, and the man raised a hand to him, as if to strike him. Edgar caught it before it could land, held it still, and Scriabin stared at him in confusion, still shaking. Edgar looked at Scriabin's arm where several crisscrossing lines bled in a way that perhaps in a better state of mind he would have known to be impossible, an illusion. Instead, he took the antiseptic that had appeared beside him that had always been there, poured it into a shallow dish, dabbed a cotton ball that likewise always and just existed into it, and then touched it to the scratches. He dreamed that Scriabin screamed when the alcohol burned through the cuts, seared through the wounds, and that the sound had been far too familiar. It burned through to memories that he wanted to forget for the simple fact that they were memories, and often Edgar thought that memories did not have as much of an effect on the present as many supposed. Scriabin tried to pull away from him, to wrench his arm free, but Edgar tightened his grip and did not let him loose. Despite the jerking of his trapped arm, of the screamed curses and threats, Edgar worked. Eventually, Scriabin's struggles quieted, and he was silent. Gauze that felt natural in his hand, pads of cotton, and Edgar wrapped it carefully around and around, his hands following what felt like an ancient pattern, but could never have been so old. He dreamed that Scriabin sat still and stared at him while Edgar bandaged his arm. When Edgar tugged at his shirt, Scriabin raised his one arm without protest, and he carefully worked the torn fabric around the ruined shoulder, trying to avoid irritating the wound any further. The gashes across his chest were now more visible, pink and red and white, and the definite evidence of some kind of claws, something animalistic. Scriabin hissed again when Edgar rested hands on his chest, felt for something although he wasn't sure what, and set to cleaning it. Scriabin's hand settled on Edgar's shoulder, clutched hard enough that Edgar felt as though his collarbone was bruised, and the ache made it hard for one of his hands to find symmetry with the other. And as the disinfectant burned its way through his chest, Scriabin made rough gasping sounds, angry and helpless. It was with a quiet certainty that Edgar worked, dreamed, found where his hands belonged and what they should be doing. He didn't question his knowledge of what to do, and neither did Scriabin. His hands kept working. His hands kept moving. More soaked cotton pads pressing against the tears, gauze stretched around to hold them in place, and Edgar alternately dipped towards and away from Scriabin as he rolled the gauze around his chest. His hands at times travelled up Scriabin's shoulder blades, and he found them sharp and protruding. Didn't want to touch them anymore, so moved on. He dreamed that Scriabin said nothing, that the affair was carried on in silence that didn't seem strange. A metal clip to hold the wrapping in place, and then he turned to the shoulder. The most damage had been done there. Edgar felt certain that Scriabin either could not feel his paralysed arm at all, or was in excruciating pain and could not find the motivation to move, to make it worse. He wiped away the blood that had turned the area red, found the limits of the wound, and he did not have to think of what to do. Under his hands he found that the edges knit together, some flesh renewed, but not all. Rough stitches appearing through and across Scriabin's skin. His fingers moved without true thought, lifting invisible needles and keeping the thread clear of tangles, and with each line that appeared, that dragged Scriabin's skin closer together, he could hear another gasp, strained and with more voice than he must have desired. Sewn shut, and then he cleaned. He pressed the cotton ball against the rough edges. He let Scriabin rest his head on his shoulder and make agonized, inarticulate sounds. He found the materials he needed appearing beside or in his hand. A brace to keep the shoulder in place, a way to stop him from moving too much, exerting himself too frequently. He dreamed that he pulled Scriabin's head away from his shoulder and looked at his face. The scratches dragged their way across his cheeks, his mouth, and his nose. His eyes remained free from damage, as somehow Edgar knew they would. Dark hair stuck to Scriabin's skin, sweaty and matted perhaps with blood, but he couldn't tell for sure. He brushed the hair away from Scriabin's face, stared at his reflection in his glasses, and found that he did not care. Constantly hidden from him. But that was all right. He rubbed away the blood on his face, watched him wince and try to turn away, but not with enough force to succeed. Edgar set his hand on his other cheek to hold him still as he cleaned the scratches despite Scriabin's flinching, wordless protests. Bandages that he found beside him when he reached out his hand, and he applied them, and still Scriabin stared at him, and still he said nothing. Silence between the two of them, and Edgar was too busy to think of why. The last open cut tended to, and Edgar leaned back. Scriabin continued to stare at him, and it was hard to tell how he felt. Edgar stared back, and he found that he could not find how he felt either. Something resolved, but he wasn't sure what it was. Something mattered, something gained meaning, something found meaning, but he didn't know what it was. A hazy mist that hovered over him, that kept trying to remind him of other things, but instead he merely looked over the dressings he had applied, thought over whether or not they were satisfactory, whether that one or this one could be altered slightly, tightened or loosened. Something happened, but he couldn't remember what. All blurry and indistinct, except the image of Scriabin sitting, swathed in white and pink bandages, staring at him, and Edgar realized he did not have to see how he felt, and reached out a little, followed that thread, and then he felt it. He felt his confusion, complete desperate confusion, and yet he said nothing. Scriabin knew, and Edgar knew, that neither of them had an answer for any question presented now, any explanation for this. Edgar reached out a hand, and Scriabin reached out his matching hand, matching skin, and something happened, but Edgar couldn't remember what at that point. Swirls and shapes and things got indistinct, and something rough brushed against him, and the one image that remained clear, the one image that he could remember of Scriabin sitting all white and black and pink and staring at him, stared, and Edgar's hands, his hands. He dreamed. He dreamed that he took care of him. Edgar woke up, and he decided that morning he would have waffles for breakfast.